10 out of 10, new favorite of the season. If you're curious about the order, here's the list now that we're halfway through. I'm putting this at the very beginning because I'm not holding back with the details this time around, so if you'd rather just get my arbitrary number score and go, there you have it. But for those willing to stay and join in my unbridled enthusiasm for this episode, thank you, and strap in. Let's do it to it. Leading up to its release, I was more excited for Guts vs. Dimitri than I have been for a death battle in quite some time. Not only was this following an episode I was more middling toward than anything else, but it was literally my number 6 pick for matchups I wanted to see on the show. So needless to say, I was hoping the team would deliver a final product that would live up to the version I dreamt up while writing about it for my top 10 video. And I'm sure you can guess from the first sentence of this video that it exceeded even those lofty hopes. I plan to break down as many details as I can pick up on in this review, which is the sort of treatment this episode deserves as far as I'm concerned. We begin with Guts' analysis, and right out of the gate, I have to gas up DJ's god-tier editing. The music and sound effects in the analyses of this episode are all timed super well, and they serve to make the visuals have even more impact than they already do. The crew has stated that they heavily leaned on the manga panels for Guts so as to avoid YouTube's bots flagging all the blood Berserk has, and while I feel bad for DJ having to edit all of that, I'm definitely not complaining about it as a viewer. The script for this episode is worth praising when it comes to the analysis too. Quite frankly, I think they should just give Lousy the writer's role whenever Death Battle does a matchup with fantasy characters, because he crushes it every time he works on them. You can tell he loves this genre, and I do as well, so getting it on the show with writing as good as this makes me very, very happy. Guts' impressive arsenal and ludicrous feats of resilience are nicely interspersed between the important beats of his background and journey. I greatly prefer how they tackled the darker elements of his source material here than how they addressed it in Guts vs. Nightmare. In that episode, they kind of dwell on it while glorifying the gritty stuff and making quirky one-liners about the eclipse. I think it's symptomatic of how a lot of Berserk quote-unquote fans perceive Guts, seeing him as the awesome, edgy anti-hero with the giant murder sword instead of the mentally broken but deeply compelling character underneath all of that surface-level stuff. This new analysis actually approaches Guts' story with the respect and tone it deserves. There's not many overt attempts at humor here, with the few jokes they do include being subdued so as to not detract from the serious nature of what's being discussed. I greatly appreciated that writing choice, since in retrospect I think the overabundance of humor in an analysis that's covering a dark and gothic series was the real reason I didn't like the jokes in Chosen Undead's rundown. I believe Guts' analysis strikes a better balance between entertainment and education, not downplaying the material while injecting some levity here and there to keep it from getting to be too much. And for a much more obvious advantage over his old rundown, Guts actually gets some semblance of real feats here. Sure, stuff like the Sea God was mentioned in his fight against Nightmare, but now it's actually given a number for its power and plays into the verdict, unlike before where it was shrugged aside for the line that will not be repeated in this house. Overall, I was very satisfied with Guts' analysis in this episode. It had all the improvements I was hoping it would, and while I'm not really into Berserk like some of my friends are, I'm very glad Guts got the kind of treatment and respect he deserved here. Of course, that respect extends to more than just his analysis, but we have another rundown to get to before we talk about any of that. Going into Dimitri's analysis, I almost felt like I was dreaming. Hearing Wiz and Boomstick discuss the continent of Fodlan and drop character names like Byleth, Sothis, Rhea, and Rodrigue was surreal. I am so happy I went into this part in particular blind, because it was a blast watching it with my friends and turning into Leonardo DiCaprio whenever I recognized a story beat or a joke from Three Houses. Yeah, like eating weeds! DJ's baller editing and Lousy's fantastic script continue to impress, elevating Dimitri's analysis to the point that it's probably my new favorite of Season 10. I won't lie, I was almost more excited for this episode by virtue of it being Death Battle's first Fire Emblem episode than anything else. Hearing about stuff like class abilities, crests, the Nabateans, and Dimitri's story in general made me happy beyond words. Let's start getting surgical with it then. I like Edelgard being listed in the things Dimitri dislikes, with the intensity of his hatred being contrasted against the hate Guts has for Griffith by the latter being written in all caps. DJ makes great use of quotes and young Dimitri imagery to fill in for Three Houses' lack of true cutscenes about his past. And the fact that we got a Tremors clip followed immediately by the exceptional tragedy of Duskur edit is truly legendary. Their discussion of Dimitri's trauma is very tactful, made even better by the great choice of background music. The inserted Smash Bros. Announcer clip of Byleth's name immediately after they introduced them was hilarious, but it does pain me that they never call them bad at any point. Oh well, maybe we'll get that moment when they fight the Traveler. My bias might be showing here, but I far and away preferred Dimitri's cutaway gag compared to Guts's. The team touched on this in the episode commentary, but the house choices for each host are so on point it's not even funny. Especially with Lousy's reasons for why Dummy would pick the Blue Lions. It turns out Three Houses discourse can be very amusing when it's filtered through quirky web show hosts. Also, there's amphibia footage on screen, let's fucking go! I love the pivot from Dimitri's abilities into the Three Houses time skip. Boomstick dropping the kill every last one of them line was just perfect, and calling Dimitri a murder hobo pleased the Dungeons and Dragons part of my brain, so that was epic. The discussion of Eredfar was great. The bit about paying teachers more after discussing how Byleth saved Dimitri from his spiral really hit close to home, and them wrapping up his analysis with his redemption was just perfect. I really have no qualms with this rundown. It's everything I could have ever wanted from the show's very first Fire Emblem analysis. I can only hope they'll use more characters from the series in the future, both because I want it to return and because I want more analyses that are as excellent as this one. I'm starting to feel like a broken record, but this episode's analyses have quickly become my new favorites of the season. They were everything I could have asked for with these characters, and I really feel like both of them were given the respect they deserved while handling Berserk and Fire Emblem very tactfully. I'm especially happy about the latter. Even my friends who have no history with Fire Emblem seemed to enjoy Dimitri's analysis, which I couldn't be happier about. That sentiment carries over to the animation as well, because again, this had pretty much everything I wanted from a battle between the Black Swordsman and the Boar Prince. The choice to set it in a snowy forest was inspired, both because it's a locale that could be found in Fargus and because the white snow contrasts perfectly against the red blood, making the brutal impact of every attack stand out to the viewer. The moonlit sky in the back is also beautiful, and it makes for some gloriously atmospheric shots, especially when it comes to the death. The sound design in this battle is top-notch. The heavy metal clangs that ring out when Guts and Dimitri exchange strikes do wonders to capture the enormity of Dragon Slayer and the strength of Eredfar. Dimitri's magic attacks sound excellent as well, with the electricity spreading across Guts' sword and armor sounding excruciating with how long it goes on for. And of course, the voice acting for both fighters is chef's kiss material. Guts is brought to life by the one and only Xander Mobus, making this his first role on the show since Season 2. That is, if you don't believe the dick splitter allegations. I think his take on Guts is a pretty great one, sounding very reminiscent of Marc de Raison's portrayal.
Let me tell you something. In battle, there's only one way you should be using your mouth!
His line deliveries and efforts were very on point all throughout this fight.
Save the high and mighty crap till you're dead.
As for Dimitri, he's voiced by Kevin Andrew Rivera, and I think he does a pretty solid job overall. I think his performance better suits time-skip Dimitri after Rodrigue's death as opposed to before, since there's some growl in Chris Hackney's voice from Three Houses that I wanted more of in the death battle.
You. What must I do to be rid of you? Out of my way!
But he still sells Dimitri's more crazed moments exactly how I would have wanted, so it ultimately balances out to a very enjoyable performance.
I will tear your head from your shoulders! The dead must have their revenge!
Lastly, before we get to the fight itself, I have to talk about the soundtrack for this episode. God's Hand is easily my favorite track from Brandon so far this season. It's a perfect song both for the battle and on its own. It's a bit odd Logan Adams wasn't on the cover art since he's on the vocals for this track alongside Brandon, but regardless, he absolutely rocked it here. Speaking of the cover art, I've heard a lot of people saying that the bodies on the cover were traced from a Berserk manga panel, but according to a comment left on Biff's review of this episode from the person who does the art for these covers, it actually wasn't traced at all. So yeah, can we try our best to not spread misinformation about the episodes that the team puts out? I think that would be just amazing. Regardless, the cover art does at least have some cool symbolism to offer. This is a chain of souls emerging from the abyss, which comes to claim dead apostles and drag them away in Berserk. The fact that the souls are grabbing at Guts and Dimitri's weapons and armor is a cool way to tie into how both of them are always haunted by the dead. It even directly ties into something Dimitri says in Three Houses, which is super cool.
Those who died with lingering regret, they will not lose their hold on me so easily.
There's a lot of layers to the meaning of the song's lyrics as well. I'll quickly break just a few of them down, since a fair chunk of them just tie into the battle aspect or the tone of the match. This seems pretty simple for a battle track, but it suits Guts and Dimitri especially well. Both of them fight with little to no care for their own well-beings, only considering self-preservation when their allies are around to keep them grounded. This is pretty similar in meaning to the previous set of lyrics. Guts and Dimitri are both fully aware that their paths of violent retribution will eventually lead to their own downfalls. As a result, they put their determination to see their choices through into their weapons, trusting that their clashing steel will see the greater fighter through. The title drop here is a good chance to discuss the meaning behind said title. The God Hand is the group of ultimate demons in Berserk, which Griffith joins after ascending to become Femto, so that connection is pretty obvious. Dimitri's connection to it might be a little less so, but there are actually a couple of possibilities. For one, the head of Eredvar is modeled after a hand, and as the hero's relics are the bones of the goddess Sothis, one could literally call Eredvar the hand of a god. Alternatively, the connection could be based on Byleth. In the scenes where Dimitri is at his most vulnerable in the Blue Lion's route, Byleth's hand reaching out to him is a common theme, and Byleth is fused with Sothis due to Rhea's shenanigans. Thus, God's hand could actually hold a far more positive connotation for Dimitri than it does for Guts, which makes for a nice dichotomy in the symbolism. This is another one where it's pretty obvious what the meaning is, but I still wanted to talk about it. Right at the end of the song, after all of the roaring vocals and raging guitars have hit their peak, we get this uplifting message from one fighter to another. I personally think this is Guts speaking to Dimitri, making it an expression of support from the loser as the victor continues down their twisted path. It could also fit for Dimitri talking to Guts though. It's a nice hint of hope to end the song and the fight on, which is very fitting for a match like this. Now, with all of that out of the way, we can finally turn our attention to the actual fighting. I said in my top 10 most wanted episodes video that you don't need a lot of setup to make Guts and Dimitri fight, and that's true, but it wasn't an invitation to have no setup at all. Dimitri mentioning Guts' reputation as the slayer of 100 men indicates that he probably heard about him and sought him out, but outside of that, they're just fighting out of the gate. At least it suits these two better than Kiryu Dragonzord and Weiss Mitsuru, but I still would have liked an established reason for them to have met and fought. This shot of them with weapons at the ready under the moon does linger a bit too long for my liking, but it's a pretty visual, so who cares? The tree is also a nice touch, since it references Guts' duel with Griffith and allows for some neat environmental interaction later on. The choreography starts with some really smooth clashes of Dragonslayer and Eredvar, with the quick movements and fluid camera adding to the sense of speed in this initial clash. Guts proceeds to take advantage of Dimitri's blocking stance, swinging him around with the weight of his sword and tossing him away in a pretty cool and clever move. Dimitri's not impressed though, and he jumps into attack with Tempest Lance while the attacking sound from Three Houses plays, blowing Guts back in a far more impactful fashion that displays the gap in power between the two. Acknowledging Dimitri's advantage up close, Guts changes to his repeater crossbow and opens fire, prompting Dimitri to swiftly parry the arrows before attacking with thunder. I love how fluidly Guts dodges the lightning. It's a great way to directly bring his best speed feat into play. The knife he throws hits Dimitri in the shoulder, exactly like how Edelgard threw the dagger he gave her, which was a nice touch. This lets Guts get in close, and Dimitri's forward stab gets BTFO'd by the flat face of Dragonslayer, allowing for the overused clang sound from the god-awful 2016 anime to be snuck in somewhere that's actually not a bad fit for it. A tip of my hat to the sound design team for that, because the fact that Death Battle made better use of this sound than a professionally made anime from Crunchyroll is some funny shit. That brief bit of levity doesn't last long though, since Guts keeps up the momentum of his strike and slashes Dimitri's back with a full 360-degree swing. Dimitri's scream and the dramatic use of slow-mo really sells the intensity of this hit, and I love how the blood splatter steams upon hitting the snow. That's some seriously impressive attention to detail. Dimitri's cape also got cut in half by the attack, which is one example of this fight's excellent use of battle damage. Not many battles on this show do much to make the fighter's lingering injuries apparent over the course of the fight, and even when they do, very few do it like this one. Dimitri's cape getting destroyed, Guts' broken arm, and the insane amount of blood they're covered in by the end all do wonders to show the viewer how badly these two are roughing each other up. More of that blood gets shed when Dimitri rebounds with a stab to Guts' chest that pins him to the tree I mentioned before. The "how dare you" line is one I could have done without though, since it doesn't really suit post-timeskip Dimitri the same way it would suit his pre-timeskip self. Dimitri had cast off his regal nature after Edelgard's war broke out and he was exiled from Fargus, so I'm not sure why he would be offended by an attack being thrown out in an already raging fight to the death. His monologue afterward makes up for that though. His shaking voice does wonders for showing how deranged his trauma has made him, and it also calls back to Dimitri's fondness for tearing heads from shoulders, since it's a threat he makes more than once in Three Houses. I also loved Guts interrupting him with a headbutt, especially since the animators took care to make it obvious when he starts paying attention to Dimitri's rambling despite the camera facing the eyeless side of his face. They clash weapons again after this, with the metallic sound effects and Guts' posture making it clear that the sheer weight of Dragon Slayer is overwhelming the narrow hilt of Eredvar. To make up for this, Dimitri brings down another bolt of lightning now that Guts is locked in place, electrocuting him in a subtle nod to the conclusion's point about his metal armor and weapons conducting Dimitri's magic. The scream Guts lets out is perfect too. It genuinely sounds like someone took a taser to Xander Mobus in the booth. Dimitri follows up on this by using Frozen Lance, impaling Guts through the arm and the shoulder. Despite this, Guts has no issues using his mini-bombs and hidden arm cannon to catch Dimitri by surprise, blowing his enemy back and shattering the ice to break himself free. This is an even better way to show Guts' utter disregard for his own safety than the arm cannon's use in Guts vs. Nightmare, since he gets a lot worse than a small scratch on the cheek for this gutsy maneuver. And then... okay, is it a stretch to say that this ending half is my favorite part of any death battle? Because I feel like it might be just that. That could be recency bias talking, so I'll have to see how I feel about it a few episodes from now, but my god man, this is exactly the kind of shit I was wanting to see going into this episode. Dimitri is surrounded by fire as a result of Guts' bombs, and a disembodied voice of the dead rings in his ears, begging for him to avenge them as more screams echo around him. This is such a sad but beautiful way to work in Dimitri's trauma over the tragedy of Duscur, and while Billy's not credited as such, I personally believe that this voice is Lambert, aka Dimitri's father, because that makes this moment even more harrowing. The great expression work in this fight doesn't disappoint with Dimitri here, as his heavy breathing and panicked glances show how overwhelmed he is. We cut over to Guts now, and his inner beast of darkness growls in his mind, tempting him to yield control over to it. Guts seems conflicted at first, but he recognizes that with his non-metal arm fucked beyond measure, he's not going to be able to wield Dragon Slayer well enough to keep up with Dimitri, and his expression falls as he realizes what he needs to do. And from there, we hit the absolute best part of the fight, which gives me goosebumps every time I watch it.
Promise, I'll kill them, all of them, down to the last one!
I'm just gonna say it. This is the best He's Just Like Me kind of scene Death Battle has ever done. Guts and Dimitri's voices rising in intensity, the harrowing visuals shifting between the bright orange of the fire and the darkness of Guts' mentality, and the zoomed in shot flickering between their eyes as they both reinforce their resolve to kill their enemies down to the last one? This right here is the kind of shit I watch Death Battle for. And as God's hand hits a gloriously epic crescendo, the Berserker armor's helm snaps down over Guts' head, the suit snapping his arm back into place with bloody fervor before letting out a roar of purely feral madness. I love how stiff the readjustment of Guts' broken arm is. It makes the action feel robotic and instantaneous, showing off how little care the armor has for Guts' well-being as long as he's in fighting form. In response, Dimitri channels his awakened state, blowing away the fire in a single burst of his aura as he moves in to meet Guts' charge. They clash and strike with blinding ferocity, blood spraying from both of them as they fight to show how far beyond caring they are about the injuries they've sustained. If they weren't out for blood before, they're out to eviscerate each other now. It's heart-pounding adrenaline in every way, which is a feeling that lasts for almost the entire rest of the battle. Dimitri ducks a swing of Dragon Slayer and jams Eredfar into Guts' chest, and while Guts seems to reel in pain at first, he doesn't even stop to remove the spear before decking Dimitri across the face. This primitive maneuver staggers Dimitri more than anything else in this fight has, which goes to show that Guts is now putting literally everything he has into this battle. That determination to rip his foe apart doesn't falter for even a second as he moves in to swing Dragon Slayer with unrelenting force. Dimitri manages to sidestep the attacks and scalps the Berserker armor with Eredfar, exposing Guts' bloody face as his eye glows red with rage and he roars at the camera. I was shitting myself when this happened during my first watch, and that didn't let up when Dimitri knocked Guts into the air and landed a critical hit with Atrocity while shouting like his life depended on it. And with Guts' motionless body pinned to the ground by Dimitri's attack, he rips Eredfar out of his chest and turns to walk away, nursing his injuries now that the rush of battle has passed. But with the last embers of strength still burning in Guts' body, the Berserker armor picks him up off the ground, slowly marches up to Dimitri, and cuts through Eredfar's hilt with a single slash. This is another detail that non-FE fans will probably miss, which makes me even happier they put so much attention to detail into this fight. See, weapons in Fire Emblem operate on a durability system, where after they're used a certain number of times, they break and can't be used without some severe drawbacks. Eredfar's durability in 3 houses is 20, and between the standard hits Dimitri has landed and his use of skills like Tempest Lance, Frozen Lance, and Atrocity, he has worn through all of its durability, meaning Guts is able to cleave through it without breaking a sweat. Dimitri's face here is pretty much exactly what I looked like when I was watching this for the first time. I thought Dimitri was about to get fucking disemboweled by Dragon Slayer, and so I braced myself for Guts to muscle through the broken head of Eredfar and end the fight with one decisive blow. Except, that blow never landed. Guts' swing freezes in place mere inches from Dimitri, and as the shot pulls out to reveal Guts' motionless body, the realization hit me at the same time it hit Dimitri. The last drop of his blood has been spilled, leaving the Berserker armor to keep Guts standing as his dead, glassy eye shows how willing he was to literally go down swinging. And as the brand of sacrifice on Guts' neck lets out those last drops of blood, the shadow of Nosferatu Zod comes into frame, indicating that the demons under Griffith's command have come to claim Guts. But Dimitri realizes that he and Guts are, or were, in the same torturous boat, and he rushes past his fallen foe and toward the demons with the broken head of Eredfar in hand, leaping away to keep them from getting Guts' soul as this shot of Guts' corpse standing in front of the Azure Moon ends the animation. This is my favorite ending to a fight in death battle history. Having Guts go out with a standing death of Benkei was a truly inspired choice, and it was the best possible way to cap off how perfectly they characterized Guts in this episode. I don't want to hear shit about how Guts dying is disrespectful to Miura's legacy, because one look at this ending should show you how much respect the team has for Guts and Berserk as a whole. Even Wiz and Boomstick have a little moment of silence for Guts after the end pun. That might be the most genuine respect they've ever shown for a combatant post-mortem. I don't think there's much more I can say about this fight at this point. Again, this was everything I wanted from this matchup and so much more. If every entry from my 10 most wanted episodes could get this kind of treatment, I would die the happiest man in the history of humanity. As for the results, they're pretty good at outlining the main points of why Dimitri either trumped Guts or had options to keep up with him in areas where Guts had the advantage. The bit about Guts' armor and sword conducting Dimitri's electricity made me especially happy, since it was a point I'd thought of in the weeks leading to this episode's release. I will say it surprised me that Hoarfrost went entirely unmentioned, since it would have given Dimitri a massive speed advantage if they decided to calc it as actual light. I totally understand why they didn't, and this is a pretty petty thing to complain about after the 4-course meal I was just fed, but a black box mentioning it would have been appreciated. And like Biff said in his review, the fact that they calced the Sea God feat for Guts while holding the Javelins of Light calc for the results made it rather obvious that Dimitri was probably gonna win. But I mean, come on, those problems are negligible in the face of one of my new favorite episodes of the entire show. I already gave my score at the start of this video, but I'm gonna give it again because Guts vs Dimitri deserves that if nothing else. 10 out of 10. A sincere thank you to the Death Battle team for turning one of my most wanted matchups into something as spectacular as this, because watching this episode made me fall in love with Death Battle all over again. Back off Season 10's other episodes, because you foul beasts will not have this episode's seat at the top. Looking to the next episode, it's kind of funny that Guts vs. Dimitri got sandwiched between two Marvel vs. DC episodes that I don't really care about. However, I'm hopeful that Martian Manhunter vs. Silver Surfer will at least be more consistent than Phoenix vs. Raven was. I've heard that Parker's been working on improving his editing for this one, which I'm looking forward to seeing. He's definitely very talented as an editor, but I feel like he's still been working on finding his groove with his episodes so far, so hopefully this will be the one where I can say,
"Oh yeah, it's all coming together."
But that's not all we have to talk about as far as future episodes go. During the Itadori vs. Denji Death Battle cast, Chad revealed that Bill Cipher vs. Discord will be following Manhunter vs. Surfer in the season order, as well as confirming that the second Champions poll is coming. I won't lie and pretend like I don't find Billcord to be the more interesting of those two episodes, but that's not really fair to the crew putting in work on Mansurfer. I'm hoping the latter will be a nice, solid middle ground between this season's high and low points, and I'm hoping the wait for the former will be even marginally less toxic than taking a nap on the elephant's foot. With that, I'm off to start rewatching Gravity Falls to get myself ready for what's to come. If anyone has recommendations of specific episodes or comics I can check out to get a grip on Discord's character, I'd appreciate you leaving those down in the comments for me. If you're still riding the high of Guts vs. Dimitri like I am and want more of it, then check out some of the Death Battle content creators I have linked in the description. Check out Biff's video on the episode in particular if you want to hear me react to it alongside our friends. Thanks for sticking with me to the end of this very passionate and very long review, and I'll see you all again for the next one. Until then, keep fighting on.